Hello everyone, I'm here with an exclusive preview spoiler for Trial by Frost. Trial by Frost is a new set coming out at the end of January, and it has an AC Frosty theme, and I definitely got to preview one of the cards that's in the heart of that theme for the set. So we're going to take a look at it really soon. If you've watched the channel at all, most of my altered content has been the attempt to quickly cover every single Beyond the Gates card before it came out. So this time I'm going to be able to talk about just one card for a longer time, with this opportunity to focus on just one card given to me by Equinox. Our card is Blizzard. It's really cool to see a card named Blizzard in Altered in general, because lots of card games and video games and even novels, the concept of a blizzard is this really unique thing that not everyone who lives in the right region gets to experience, but the idea of it is very fascinating. It's a very special kind of disaster, and Trial by Frost is giving us a specific interpretation of what it might be like for a blizzard to happen in the game. Send or reserve each character from target expedition, then exhaust them. Exhausted characters can't be played and have no support abilities. You can see in the art here by Jean-Baptiste Andrier, which I'm probably mispronouncing, that everyone is slowly getting swept away by the blizzard. And the art is kind of conveying that these are pretty skilled adventurers, but the blizzard is just too much for anybody, which is kind of suggesting the idea that the tumult is even more hostile than like a normal place on Earth. I don't think Earth is the word for the place in Altered, I'm not sure. But that's kind of the idea here, and you're targeting an expedition instead of characters. It makes it more of an environmental impact and means that the effect of the card is that there's going to be a specific expedition the victim didn't win. There's not necessarily going to be specific characters who didn't succeed. Characters in the other expedition have a pretty good shot at winning after 5 mana has been expended for Blizzard. I'm going to put the other ones right here at the beginning, and then we'll kind of circle back and talk about Axiom at the end. So here's the Axiom one. Are these in order? Yeah, I think at the last minute I decided to put the Axiom before the rare. The Axiom one has no improvements at all. You see the cool little visor made me think that maybe that was only in the Axiom art, but it's in both rare arts. It's further emphasizing how well prepared these adventurers are, but then further emphasizing with the lightning that this is just a blizzard that no character is going to be able to stay in the reserve for. And then we have the Easir rare version. I cost 1 less if there are 2 or more exhausted cards in reserve. So this is applied before the spell itself exhausts any characters. And we might not have a lot of mana to exhaust cards, so from my perspective, filming this video in advance of the spoilers, I don't know enough to know how we could meet this easily, but there's a sort of assumption you make when you look at a new set that the developers are probably supporting some of the themes. So I presume we can do this at least some of the time. Exhaust cards in reserve. Notice this new language, in reserve. Previously, Anansi says your reserve, and then the rare Anansi says each player's reserve to contrast it, but this one says in reserve. I'm reasonably confident that in reserve means in all of the reserves. They just don't want to write in each player's reserve out over and over throughout the set when this mechanic is going to come up so often. And it's reasonably intuitive that in reserve means all the reserve areas. So it might be easier to exhaust your own cards, since the designers might not need to require us to spend tons of mana to tire our own cards, as a way of meeting this condition easier. We do know of one spoiler before the before this wave of spoilers. There was a card that is a spell and exhausts itself once the first time you play it. I would be very surprised if Easir doesn't have a few of those. So these are the cards that are most similar to this effect already from the Beyond the Gates set. Twinkle Twinkle is interesting because it's going to have the exact same impact on who wins that expedition for one less mana, generally. But it's a huge drawback to have to face all of those characters the next turn. And Twinkle Twinkle widely has not been viewed as playable in the rare form, possibly not just because of the rare point you're expending. It is very powerful on the very last turn of the game, and that one extra mana is really nice if you're playing this on the very last turn of the game instead of Blizzard, although you can't play these cards in the same faction. It's an abstract comparison. But we may see a lot more use and play out of Blizzard because the characters don't wake up, and there's several turns you can use Blizzard. You can use it on the 6, 7, or 8 mana turn pretty feasibly, instead of just the final turn of the game with Twinkle Twinkle. Kraken's Wrath has exactly the same cost, except in the specific case of it being a rare Blizzard and fulfilling the condition. Even when you're playing the rare Blizzard, I'm guessing you don't always fulfill the condition. So usually these are the same cost, and usually these will send a similar number of characters to reserve. So we're going to be comparing these later for sure to think about them. Kraken's Wrath does see play, mostly in the rare version, especially compared to Twinkle Twinkle. Another similar design that hasn't seen a lot of play, but I'd like to look at what cards are similar anyway, is Celebration Day. For 5 cost, you can pick an expedition, and that expedition can't move forward this day. It similarly has a benefit against future things being added to that expedition, but in Blizzard's case, we're trying to hope that we can make it illegal to play the cards to the empty expedition that they would want to play. Celebration Day is just continuously checking as new things get added to the expedition just still isn't allowed to win. Let's go over a really basic turn using Blizzard. This is going to be an example of a 7 mana turn without the first player token. But we should note that Akesha can do this with the first player token by using the After You ability. First, our opponent starts with a 1. That would be a pretty normal thing to do. And say we play a 1 to the opposite side. Then they play a bigger 3. Then we could play a 1 to the other side. This means that if our opponent tries to spot remove a character, we're still going to have an expedition that's good for Blizzard. And if our opponent continues to play larger characters, we're still going to have a good situation for Blizzard. And here would be a pretty typical play to add more stats to the side that needs it more. And then we could Blizzard. And this is now, no matter how good this 1 cost and this 3 cost card is, this has become a 1/1 turn. 1 advancement for Easir, 1 advancement for the other side. The number of cards expended is pretty even, although the spell is fleeting, so a little higher for Easir. But the main advantage is being able to do this really universally and consistently, no matter how good these characters are. And even if these characters are a little more plentiful, like if this was a Foundry Armorer with both of the pieces here, this would still work pretty well. So here are some specific interactions that Blizzard has with other cards that some other cards may not have, because of the specific nuances of how Blizzard works. First, I wanted to briefly mention the seemingly intended set synergies from the few cards that have already been spoiled. The Moth Larva encourages you to exhaust cards in reserve before you play it, and the rare version of Blizzard also encourages you to do that. So if you put both the Blizzard and the Moth Larva in your deck, then you'll be doing the chore of trying to meet this condition and meet the condition for both of them at the same time, hopefully. You could also theoretically play the Moth Larva after playing Blizzard to get a 2/1/2, but usually you won't want to do that just because missing out on removing one additional character is so much better than the boost. Icebound Pass gives you a trial counter whenever you exhaust a card in reserve. The timing of when you get the dragon to pop out from the Blizzard is a little bit funny with Icebound Pass, because you've just completely emptied one of the expeditions and a 5/5 is kind of overkill to beat it. However, curving Icebound Pass into getting 2 counters from a Blizzard and then having the Icebound Pass ready to pop later is pretty nice. And there may be some advantages to just drawing a card and just getting a really consistent win in an expedition with a 5/5/5. That's definitely not easy to contest. They may end up going in the same deck together just because caring about exhausting a card in reserve is going to fit together, similar to the Moth Larva. Over here in the middle column, I wanted to note which characters you want to look out for to try to get the and then exhaust the characters that went to reserve clause to be the most relevant. Because if your opponent plays a card from their hand with what little mana is left, usually there's not a lot of mana left after the Blizzard. Cards that are played from hand aren't affected by the Blizzard, but some decks are structured so that the cheapest cards that are available are also the cards that are using the reserve cost. So it's frequently the cards you just sent to reserve. So if you look at a Fen deck full of Orbo's Trickster, or an Akesha deck full of Kagurian Alchemist, you might be able to send these characters to reserve and then exhaust them, and then they can't be played back to refill the reserve. And if those cards are already in reserve when you started your turn, well then maybe now isn't the time to be blizzarding, maybe now is the time to be sabotaging, and then blizzard the next turn. So that's a little bit of an interaction for how to maximize Blizzard. It's just not even really a specific mechanic, just a numbers thing. And over here, we have support abilities, which is sort of also a numbers thing. It's sort of like these cards cost 0 from reserve instead of costing 1 from reserve. But these are really effective at jumping back into the expedition that you emptied with the Blizzard, or that you would have emptied with a card like Kraken's Wrath. And Blizzard says that you can't use these support abilities until next turn, when it wouldn't matter as much. So Blizzard is going to be really effective against these kinds of cards. And in some cases you'll overflow them from reserve anyway, so they won't even get to be played. Especially when these are being played out of Fen, who has a really full reserve, like all the time, and very frequently immediately activates a support ability whenever you send one of our cards to reserve. As a footnote, we don't see gigantic characters played a lot, and that might not be as much of a balance thing as just them being a flashy effect that you would expect to only be played by specific strategies. But if you do run into a gigantic character and you have a Blizzard in your hand, then you get to pick which expedition has the most individual characters, and then always just additionally hit all the gigantic characters, because that's how gigantic works. So that's pretty cool and helpful. Here's another specific interaction. Tiebreakers are funny with target expedition spells. We've already asked about how rulings work for Twinkle Twinkle. Like, as newbies, we asked, like, wait, how do these target expedition cards work in Tiebreakers? How does Gigantic work in Tiebreakers? It works that you put your characters in an expedition, and it's mostly arbitrary which expedition you pick, except these cards come along and say target expedition, and then it matters. Blizzard is going to target your opponent's expedition with the most characters in it, without any regard to any other strategic benefit of that expedition, just that it has the most stuff in it. Because you don't get to break your characters into infinitely tiny pieces and distribute them evenly, there's usually going to be one expedition that has more stuff than the other stuff. So Blizzard could get like a lot of points of value on a tiebreaker turn of the game. And a tiebreaker turn of the game is going to be like 9, 10, 11 mana. Haven't done the math on the spot, but 5 mana is not going to be egregiously more than half of your mana. It's going to be about half of your mana, or maybe potentially less. Usually not less, but it could be less. So if you can get more than half of your opponent's board for half of your mana, that's pretty exciting. And you're also sweeping a bunch of anchored stuff in tiebreakers, possibly. They get to evenly distribute away from their anchored stuff, but once it becomes lumpy because of the anchored stuff, you get to Blizzard the side that has more stuff and try to win in the tiebreakers. Potentially, we could see Easir decks just more willing to enter tiebreakers than they were before because of this interaction. Maybe Kraken's Wrath was already supposed to do that, but you can't play 3 rare Kraken's Wrath just to fish for tiebreaker stuff. You could play 3 common Blizzard just to fish for tiebreaker stuff. So it's very interesting. But I will note that small step, giant leap causes tiebreakers not to happen an awful lot of the time. This is a very funny rules interaction with there's an A and B variant of Axiom Capella uniques and the Muna Capella uniques. They either have the normal Capella ability or they have this ability where when I go to reserve from the expedition zone, you may play me for free and I gain a sleep. I have one of these, and I've been collecting like a couple more, purchasing from other players because I actually really like this style of card. And this style of card gets really nuked by Blizzard in a funny way, because it says when I go to reserve from expedition zone, you may play me for free and I gain a sleep. That means that when Blizzard sends it to the expedition zone, you'll try to create the ability to play for free and gain a sleep, but you always finish the effects of a spell before you start resolving triggers in Altered. So Capella is going to get exhausted before this ability actually happens, and exhausted says you can't play this card. So when this effect resolves, it's going to say you may play me, but you also can't play me, so she's not going to get played. She's going to get stuck in reserve. If we happen to see more of this card, more of this effect at common or rare, this could come up more. But also I think this unique specifically might matter some. I've seen the Mooner versions be pretty popular because they have a lot of resiliency. So I think this interaction, it could come up even though it's on a pretty specific unique. It's a pretty good unique. And it'll come up for me specifically because I've been collecting these and I'm not going to stop playing them. I'm just going to shake my opponent's hand for blizzarding me, so. Here's an important interaction for Blizzard. It hopefully you thought of it, or would have thought of it if I didn't mention it, but Tough 2 it says that spells and abilities that target cost 2 more. It doesn't say that anything that befalls your character costs 2 more. It says that if you are targeted, it costs 2 more. So this has already been an existing phenomenon for Twinkle Twinkle, that you can Twinkle Twinkle a bunch of warded things. But Blizzard is a substantially more playable card than Twinkle Twinkle, in my little opinion. And so this interaction against Spindle and other tough characters is going to be a pretty big deal. No matter how much tough you have, all of it is going away. And this is particularly relevant when Spindle is starting to be used as just like an anti-Easir card in general. Like people slotting it in with a game plan that is going to involve mana zoning it against people that aren't Easir and putting it into play against Easir, and Easir just not having a way to mana zone and keep a combination of cards that functions well underneath the spindle. Now you don't necessarily have to destroy the spindle. There may be a way to function underneath the spindle. You can mana zone your spot removal, keep Blizzard. Mana zone your spot removal, keep Blizzard, and try to fight through the spindle. So we're going to analyze some of the trade-offs against Kraken's Wrath. I guess before I go into this, I would want to mention why do you play Blizzard or Kraken's Wrath? So the thing Blizzard and Kraken's Wrath do for Easir is you mainly see them in Akesha, and what they mainly do in Akesha is let you play either zigzag or full stall control, and they do different things for each of those strategies. Kind of. The thing that full stall control likes out of Blizzard and Kraken's Wrath is when it can eliminate threats of advancement that just no other card can eliminate. You're trying to draw lots of cards in that strategy and just make your opponent advance as few times as possible until you freeze them with the Easir Bastion and other just big haymaker effects that can guarantee 2-0s. Or often guarantee 0-0s. Guarantee no one advances for several turns in a row until you 2-0. So in those strategies, you often don't have like large creatures that can be slightly larger than some of your creatures. You likely don't have many other cards that can deal with a lot of tokens. So players might try to break through that strategy by playing Open the Gates and putting all of the open gates in one lane. And both Kraken's Wrath and Blizzard can kind of fight against that and make sure you're still stopping them from advancing, even though they're playing different types of cards that weren't as easy to deal with as Off You Go, weren't as easy to deal with Banishing Gate. And Zigzag, it's similar in the sense that you like that you can beat specific types of effects with the card that maybe other cards couldn't beat, but you're less likely to have a toolbox and more likely to just commit to playing Blizzard or Kraken's Wrath on a specific Zigzag turn of the game. Zigzag, if you don't know, is an Akesha deck that is built around the advancement plan of 1/1, 1/1, 1/1, 1/1, 1/1, 1/1, and then small step giant leap. So Blizzard is attractive. Blizzard and Kraken's Wrath are both attractive because on mana 6 and mana 7, you can just commit that those specific turns you're going to play 1-cost characters and then play either of these spells, and they have pretty unconditional coverage into the kinds of things that might stop you from getting a 1/1. You're less likely to have a huge hand to where you opted into that amongst a ton of other options, the way that might happen in the full control. And also in full control, you may not care as much whether you actually advance against the empty expedition because you're planning to build these engines that will help you win the long game anyway. In Zigzag, you want specific mana amounts that let you still advance at least 1/1 every single turn. So I would say that Zigzag would be more likely to hold on to Kraken's Wrath for longer, because as you see in the top diagram here, there's a specific turn on mana 6. If your opponent plays a 3-drop and splits them across the lanes, Kraken's Wrath will win you a 1/0 turn, and Blizzard will not. And so that's something to care about, because it's an entire advancement of progress for playing one card over the other. And it would represent a rare point expenditure, but anytime you do successfully spend a rare point and get one advancement you wouldn't have otherwise gotten, I think you have always spent your rare point very correctly. If there's an anchored character, if there's anchored little tokens or extra stuff early on turn 6, this might come up less. If you're less able to manage your hand and play either 5-cost spell exactly on turn 6, this may come up less. So this may not be this specific board may not be like an absolute reason always to play Kraken's Wrath, but it is something to consider, and they did make Kraken's Wrath strong enough and this new card, different enough that there's this really real situation where Kraken's Wrath is better, and probably several others that I'm not calling out specifically here. Second bullet point is that Kraken's Wrath can completely empty one expedition and have leftover power for the other expedition. As mentioned in the specific example on day 4, that's really easy to convert. It can be possible to convert in other situations. It can be possible to benefit just because the thing in the other lane has a special ability. Maybe you don't actually have enough leftover mana to go win the other lane that you did splash damage to, but maybe it had an ability. Sometimes this difference might not matter because it's just all you can do to put a small character in the expedition that was most ravaged by your big spell, and you don't have enough characters to put in the partially damaged expedition, But this is a general thing that Kraken's Wrath does better for sure. In the middle, we have Kraken's Wrath is relatively dependent on consuming a rare point. There is a common version of this spell. The common version is send three target characters to reserve with hand cost 5 or less. But it's so much stronger when it's 6 or less instead of 5 or less. If your opponent plays a 3 and a 3, you have to just not use part of the Kraken's Wrath if you cast the Kraken's Wrath. That's the most extreme example. But also just if you play with both cards, then you can just find a lot of examples of the common Kraken's Wrath just kind of doesn't flip enough boards when flipping boards is what it does, and it's kind of a problem. It's not like Baba Yaga, where occasionally Baba Yaga loses a lane and at least it drew a card. This Kraken's Wrath does not do anything except win lanes. It does not gain you any card advantage because you're sending to reserve characters that would have gone to reserve anyway. Aside from the rare point, I think the rare point is a big deal. It means you can play kind of as many Blizzards as you want and toss some of them into mana. It means you can play an unpredictable number of Blizzard to keep your opponent on your toes when this is a type of spell with a lot of counterplay. It means you can include rares that are going to take advantage of these empty boards better. Aside from the rare point difference, there's all the specific interactions we went over in the previous pages are only things that apply to Blizzard. They don't apply to Kraken's Wrath. Especially the Spindle thing, because Kraken's Wrath costs 8 extra mana against Spindle, which is funny. And there's another thing going on where Blizzard is less effective in the way people usually play their cards. In terms of targeting one expedition, it's usually a bad thing that you have to target one expedition because usually people spread between 2 expeditions and keep alternating which one they threaten. But there's specific cases where a player will just play 1-drop, 2-drop, 2-drop, all in one expedition, because they're afraid of you playing a spot removal and then a 4/4/4 for 3. And then if they want to 1/1 through those kinds of plays, they need to put all of their army on one side to try to make sure they 1/1 you. And they're especially likely to do that if they're head on expeditions. They know that 1/1/1 is the name of the game for them. So if you have access to small step and your opponent's faction doesn't have access to small step, this might not come up, but I think against Sportis specifically, you may see this come up, and then especially if you're playing full control, you might see it come up. But maybe if you're playing zigzag and you're sort of leaning into those kinds of strategies, maybe it could come up. what happens if you pile all in one lane to try to guarantee a 1/1, even if you deal with a medium creature and some spot removal, is that Blizzard will like destroy all the things and you'll wish you had split your stuff across two sides. Isatok does a similar thing, but it does it for 1 more mana, so we might see this phenomenon even more with Blizzard than you could with Isatok. It's going to have a pretty similar play pattern, because once Isatok comes down, you're not going to continue playing things in the wrong side, so it's sort of like Isatok destroys those things. I do think that no matter what, Blizzard should increase the number of ways that Easir can build decks that deal with the threats that people might present, and do so at common, and generally have a lot stronger decks and maybe a growth in meta share, especially for the 2 heroes that are not doing the best in Easir. So I'm really excited we're getting this card. So here's some cards that kind of emphasize why Blizzard works well for each of the heroes. I put the promo version of Akesha just because this card is so clearly... It seems to be meant for Akesha, and it works really well for Akesha. She's sort of the most excited to get it. It adds some unconditionalness to what we previously had in Kraken's Wrath. And it also adds some like rewards for playing a card like Kraken's Wrath if you're playing the Trial maybe, or some similar cards. And it's going to be really good all around. I put an Alice here just because it doesn't really need any specific card from Akesha. It's working with her hero ability. And if you did put an Alice in your deck, it would actually work pretty well. One thing I didn't actually put on a slide, but wanted to mention is that in the basic example where you put a 1/1 in each of 2 lanes, you don't actually have to. It doesn't have to be stats in each of the lanes. Only one of them needs to be stats. The rest can just be 1 mana after use or 0 mana after use, because you're only going to go for a 1/1. You can't afford 2 blizzards in one turn. So you only need stats in the side that you're actually going to blizzard. It is a little nice to have a small character in each of the sides, so you can pick which one to send to reserve and have to be chosen during cleanup to remove. But if you only have like an Alice and a small character, that can just do the trick just as well. And that means that Alice specifically plus a 1-cost character could do a blizzard 1/1 on the 6 mana turn, which is pretty cool. Based on certain estimates for how many characters they have, of course. The more your opponent after use to cancel out your after use, that's something that can fight well against these cards effectively. Lindewe and Ma has a lot of incidental after you, because the things you want to sacrifice, you don't want to spend a lot of mana on them, which sort of incidentally means they cost 1 and are good after use. So I would say that's the thing that would make Lindewe and Ma interested in Blizzard. You don't really need the unconditionality of having more removal in your deck, because you have booms sometimes. Although this is common, so that's good. Another thing that is good for Lindewe and Ma that I thought of at the last minute is that you can sort of choose to add more budget to the hero expedition in a way that Lindewe and Ma kind of struggles to do. So for instance, if it's like mana 9 and you go play a 1-cost to the companion expedition, and then you go activate Baba's Ispa, get up to 2/2/2, and then you go play like a small character with the Maw. Maybe your opponent just is like, fine, you're so good at Companion Expedition, I'm going to give up on Companion Expedition. I'm just going to stop playing cards. I don't want to run out of cards. your Lindewe and Ma, you can't do well in the Hero Expedition. I'm just going to pass. You've spent all these 1-mana cards and aren't really doing anything, and I know I can't beat Ma. Then you could just like Blizzard the other side, and Blizzard like scales with what your opponent is doing in the Hero Expedition. So the fact that your opponent's hero ability is functioning in the Hero Expedition and you can't make your hero ability function in the Hero Expedition, there might be some benefit to that. That might be pretty exciting. There's a lot of really cheap uniques that I like to play with that you can play in the Companion and Expedition to goad your opponent into doing that kind of thing. I think I've seen some kinds of play patterns like that before, so I'm interested in trying out a common Blizzard or two in my Lindewe and Ma deck and seeing how it does. So we'll see. Afanis and Sanka, I think, is mainly interested in that Spindle interaction. He's more interested in that Spindle interaction than anyone else because he needs to include lots of spells in his deck, and he's gonna run out of good spells that are exciting to play that don't say target an opponent's character. So he's going to expect to beat some big characters by targeting them, but then sometimes there's going to be a Spindle. So I think this is going to help kind of stitch things together for him. Maybe this isn't really going to help him more than it helps everyone. I'm not really sure. I think Akesha and Lindewe definitely benefit the most, and that's kind of exciting to me because I think Afanis seems to be doing the best of the three right now by a lot. But this is what I have flagged as the most interesting interaction for Afanis and Sanka. It's a little bit of a non-combo to give a character you control a boost for playing the Blizzard, because Blizzard tends to create an empty expedition that you can win. And 1 boost is probably not enough. Even 2 boosts from your other spell is probably not enough for you to win the expedition that you didn't Blizzard for a 2-0. Now we're going to talk about how Blizzard fits into the Axiom strategy. I don't think it feels like it's going to be instantly and obviously powerful in the Axiom faction. Kraken's Wrath hasn't done a lot in the Axiom faction yet. Some of it is just cards we have access to so far, and not as much the abilities of the 3 heroes. I don't think the abilities of the 3 heroes have a poor interaction with these kinds of big spells quite as much as the card pool does. So as the card pool changes, I think all 3 are going to have more spots where they can use Blizzard. And just the rest of the Trial by Frost set file could do that on its own. Or even me missing out on some cool strategies could do that on its own. So first to look at Sierra and Oddball. Sierra and Oddball has Axiom Reprocessor, which is really good at letting her draw lots of cards. Drawing cards is kind of a prerequisite to using lots of After You, passing priority a lot, because it doesn't matter how cheap you try to get all the cards in your deck if you run out of them. And feeling confident you won't run out of them also lets you make them cheaper. So although, of course, her permanents with hand cost 3 or more, they have to cost 3 or more. They're not going to pass priority super well for a Blizzard. But there'll be other cards in your deck, and if you do make the cards that cost 3 or more be your cards that draw you a ton of other cards, like Axiom Reprocessor, you might be able to pass really well to throw the Blizzard out. You also sometimes have small Brass Bugs from Brass Bug Hive to just go ahead and win the expedition that you emptied out without further effort. Maybe that lets you play like a Harvest instead of having to play a small character to the expedition you plan to Blizzard, so that could be cool. So those are the kinds of things we might do with Sierra. Not fully crystal yet, but that's one card that looks good. Sebastian Marmo is kind of interesting because his ability is definitely doing the opposite of what you want to do with Blizzard. You pay one mana, you have one less mana for priority passes, and then you need to Blizzard after that. So if you have it's a 7 mana turn, you're only gonna have 1 mana for priority passes before you Blizzard. Something that can happen with characters or heroes like Subpassion Marmo in hero-based games is that when you have a problem you need to solve, like Subhash running out of cards, as a card pool offers you more and more ways to solve that problem, sometimes you put so many antidotes in your deck that you're willing to play additional cards that require those antidotes. An example of this we've already seen is that people will loop Ouroboros Inkcasters to just have infinite card draw in Subpassion Marmo and just never run out of cards. On your 5 mana turn, you can create a Brass Bug, play an Ouroboros Inkcaster, play an Ouroboros Inkcaster, and you've only lost half a card that turn, and you've deployed 3 threats. Ouroboros Inkcaster itself can help by leaving more 1-cost cards in your hand because you're playing this instead, but isn't directly cheap enough to after you effectively for the Blizzard. But I think this is a good general example of how the future card pool may give us such great ways to draw cards that when we're spamming all of them in Subpassion Marmo, we're willing to use a chain ender like Blizzard that required us to have so many of these small draw cards, like the rare Axiom Salvager that I also put here. And over to Trace and Rossum. Trace and Rossum has the hero ability that the most directly combos with the Blizzard because you do draw an extra card. It's sort of like the Axiom Reprocessor as his effect. And if you play more cards, then you're more able to pass and Blizzard the things your opponent played and be the last one to play any cards as you add a winning card, or just as the Blizzard is the last thing that is played all day. Currently, Trace and Rossum is very preoccupied on hitting Rest 5, finding Haven, and then playing characters off of Haven that are really strong off of Haven. And in a lot of cases, 5 mana's worth of Haven characters is just going to be even bigger than anything you could be throwing a Blizzard at. So that makes Trace and Rossum a little less interested in using it immediately. He would only want to use it to just deal with the craziest huge unique boards to finish a game. But that leads to another problem that he's usually behind and catching up towards the end of the game. I put Keylon Burst here because I'm going to speculate that Blizzard could be most likely to be relevant to Axiom and Trace the most of all these three. Maybe Sierra second. If things change to where there's a new strategy for Trace that doesn't use the Haven and instead emphasizes how you can draw a lot of cards and have lots of different answers to lots of different boards, if that kind of deck started to exist, and it doesn't exist right now, but if it did, then I think you could play Blizzard in that kind of deck. It would be similar to Control Akesha. You would just, instead of playing Magical Training, you would just have Magical Training on your face and try to have all the removals for the right kinds of things your opponents are doing, and just draw your entire deck, and then finally win a little bit at the end. That is to say, none of these have immediate exciting uses for the card, but we may see maybe the set synergies are going to be really huge, and it is interesting that there could be like transformational ways of playing these heroes that would work pretty well with the card. And they do interact with the Brass Bug token mechanic a little bit to have empty expeditions. That is the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. You can check out more content on my channel as I have more things to share. And thank you for watching. Please buy Trial by Frost from your local stores and enjoy the set. And make it out to your local Battle Pass events to play these cards, because the more we play and explore, the more we can figure out all the kinds of strategies that might be available to us. Have a great day!